Welcome to Act in Line, the podcast of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Caroline Roberts, producer and host. Today we're going to be discussing, of course, the one subject on everyone's minds right now, the coronavirus. 2020 currently looks very different from how many of us had imagined, and I'm sure all of you have been affected one way or another by the virus. The nation and really the world is in anxiety or grief right now. There are so many elements about this issue that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks and months, and we'll be here to cover this crisis as it unfolds for you. But for right now, I'd like to take you back to where it all started, in Wuhan, China. What responsive measures should have been taken that weren't? How did the People's Republic of China put the world in danger? And who in China risked their lives and even the lives of their family members to raise the alarm for your sake? Helen Raleigh, a senior contributor at the Federalist, joins me today to answer. There's a lot of information packed in this episode, so be sure to check out the show notes for a real deep dive into what we'll be talking about, including stories from people in Wuhan who spoke up against China's communist regime. Show notes are posted every Wednesday when our episodes release at blog.acton.org. As of March 17, coronavirus, or COVID-19, has infected 126 countries, and it's estimated that it's also infected at least 180,000 people worldwide. As of recording this, over 7,000 people globally have died from the virus that originated in Wuhan, China. Here to speak with me about this issue is Helen Raleigh, a senior contributor at the Federalist. Helen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Helen, you have written a lot about this issue, about the coronavirus, for the Federalist, and I think that you've really done a great job at bringing attention to China's massive failings to deal with the crisis when it first began. So I'd like to start from the very beginning of this issue. We know that the first appearance of this strain of coronavirus, or also called COVID-19, first showed up in the village of Wuhan in China. But this first case was confirmed a number of months ago. It looks like now we have evidence that it was confirmed all the way back in mid-November. But here's the problem, basically, is that Chinese authorities told the World Health Organization about coronavirus showing up in Wuhan on December 31. So that's more than a month after the very first case appeared. Obviously, China has failed not only Wuhan and their country, but really the world in not bringing this to our attention earlier. Can you detail these failings for us? What first happened and whose voices were silenced?
Sure. Thank you for having me again. This is evolving issues as we know more information. So as of now, like you mentioned, that we know earlier patient zero appeared in China in mid-November. But the Chinese, from earlier reports, most people confirmed that at least the first reported case to hospital appeared in Wuhan, China on December 1st. Chinese authorities did not notify WHO, the World Health Organization, on December 31st, which, like you mentioned, is a delay for about a month. Everything we learned about the pandemic now is that those early days, weeks, are very crucial. Had the Chinese government come clean earlier and address it immediately, take decisive early actions, all our life would be much different now. We're not going to experience all this death, sickness, and working from home, or our life basically around the world totally turned upside down. So back in China, they were medical professionals. When the first cases appeared in Wuhan, there were several medical professionals. We knew at least 8 of them noticed something was wrong. Initially, they thought it was SARS because, coronavirus, as we know now, is a new virus. But people back in China, those doctors, they have experience dealing with SARS. So they initially saw those cases they met with SARS, but they know at least it's infectious. So they try to notify one doctor tried to notify her own authority in the hospital, and she was, dismissed as overly concerned. And then she tried to put her staff. Her name is Ai-fen. She tried to make sure all her staff wear protective gears, not the overall we saw nowadays, but at least wear just basic things, gloves and masks. And another doctor, Li Wenliang, which we're gonna probably talk about more, he also noticed about this case. He learned from Dr. Ai-fen, the lady I mentioned earlier. And so Li posted in his, basically his college alumni group, just warned his friends and the families to say, hey, everybody should pay attention. There's something suspicious going on with this viruses. And he and other doctors who shared his post, there were 8 of them. They were called into Wuhan police station, and they were reprimanded for spreading rumors. Dr. Li later posted a forced confession he had to sign in Chinese, basically ordering him stop spreading rumors and make sure he understood there'll be serious consequences if he continued to talk about the virus. So Dr. Li, signed the confession. He went back to work, and it turns out that he unknowingly treated a patient who also unknowingly was infected by the disease. So Dr. Li was infected himself, and he passed away last month, and his death really became a tipping point in China.
And he was only 34, right?
He was only 34,
wow.
And he was very young. So there were rumors going on because when he was, from the time that he was confirmed that he was contracted with the disease to his death, there were at least several weeks time in between. And he was reportedly tested multiple times, and his test result was always negative. But he was just keep getting sicker and sicker. And so the week before he died, that his test finally came back was, he was positive, basically means he's infected. And ironically, on that same day, he accepted interviews for multiple outlets, including international outlets. And that interview basically became his last interview. And he left us with this famous last words from Dr. Li is, a healthy society should not have only one voice. And Dr. Li passed away a couple of days later. And what nobody, not even Chinese government, expected was that Dr. Li's passing has become this tsunami, emotional tsunami within, in China among Chinese people.
Well, in a piece from the Wall Street Journal, it was reported that Wuhan's mayor said that his hands were, quote, tied by rules that require Beijing's approval before releasing sensitive information. So all of this can be tracked back to Beijing, and that Xi Jinping would not allow this information to leak out of Wuhan, it sounds like.
Yes, it's absolutely true, because she is a very different Communist Party leader compared to his predecessors. He's very controlling. And he basically, since he came into power from late 2012, he consolidated all the power in his own hands. So his nickname is he's a chairman of everything. So nothing can be done, nothing important can be done in China without his personal approval. And he's also took the controlling of information flow much, much further than his predecessors. Well, because when he came to power, China had this financial resources and the technology know-how to really monitor its population's speech and the behaviors through facial recognition, cameras everywhere, and through online censorship. So he has all this. So he basically practicing something called digital Leninism. So he has the ability to control the information flow, and he, unlike his predecessors, he emphasized more than anyone that he only wants a certain message out. He wants to preserve certain image that he wants to show. The image he wants to show to Chinese people as well to the rest of the world is China is this returning world power. China is this benevolent world power that is rising peacefully, and it's basically just going to go back to claim what it's originally what China's rightful place is this world power, everybody should respect and bow down, to. And so a virus, something like this, a spread of virus is something that definitely is to him it's a bad news. He doesn't want to let the information out. He want to control the messaging. He want to keep everything wrapped up as long as he can until he find a way to present it in the most positive way, which we're seeing what he's doing right now.
Well, I think it's shocking to many people to think about just all of the fallout from this virus that originated in Wuhan. But, in some ways, it's not surprising at all the length that they went to cover up the information occurred at all.
Right. And that's the nature of a dictatorship. Xi is really a dictator. He changed the Chinese constitution a couple of years in 2017, I believe, and basically made him, took out the term limit and made him a president for life. So in any dictatorship, whether it's Mao, Stalin, or, Fidel Castro, dictatorship breed liars, right? Because the price of telling truth is so high, you either, willing to, give up your life like Dr. Li did in order to tell the truth, or you just, in order to survive, you just have to become liars. That's why that the Wuhan mayor, even though I think he's personally and he should be held responsible for what he did as a part of the cover-up. But I also sympathize with, that I do believe his hands were tied, that pandemic is not something he can just go out, tell people what to do. He needs Beijing's approval. So all this responsibility really, she is the one who should bear the responsibility.
Yeah. Well, so alerting the public was delayed at every step. But the World Health Organization, you also write that on February 8, Tedros Adhanom, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He is the Director General of the World Health Organization. He couldn't stop praising the Chinese government's response. What is his relationship with China? Why is this in his personal interest?
Yeah, it's very puzzling. I think in my article I mentioned a couple of things. One of them is, even though China is not the largest contributor to WHO, United States is, but China has been spending its money other ways. The communist government has emphasized that cultivating relationships with leaders in international organizations to try to build influence, and also China's really big into placing Chinese officials, government officials into those international organizations, basically use those international organizations as the platform to promote the image and message that the communist China wanted to promote, and also use those international organizations to shield any criticisms and towards China. In terms of what happened right now with the pandemic and the behavior of WHO, it shows at least for Beijing, those cultivations, those efforts really paid off. Because it's really puzzling. After China notified the WHO on December 31st. And Chinese officials did not report many new cases, even though, images on social media show that the Wuhan's hospital is overwhelmed. The hospital crowded, and people are complaining they couldn't get care. Eventually Chinese government had to shut down the city on January 23rd. But prior to that, the Chinese CDC officials is still openly saying on China's state media that the likelihood of a person-to-person transmission is very low. This whole time, when Chinese government is delaying, covering up, and still giving misinformation, WHO did not call them out. WHO did not call them out about the cover-up, did not call them out about the delay, did not call them out about the misinformation. But as soon as China announced they're going to lock down 60 million people in 3 different cities, all you could hear are praises from WHO about this. Oh, this is decisive actions. And when United States announced the travel ban from China, WHO joined China criticizing United States for the travel ban, to say, well, you don't need to be so hysterical. Guess what? Now, WHO encourage all the countries to take extreme measures to follow China's needs. So it's like It's like WHO as the international healthcare organization, somehow it allowed China's powerful financial as well as the world power status to influence a healthcare organization to make healthcare decisions based on political influence. Another thing WHO is doing is that I found it's very troubling is that since 2016, under Beijing's pressure, WHO kicked Taiwan out of the WHO, so Taiwan lost its membership. Taiwan so far in this whole pandemic, Taiwan is one of the few countries have been doing a great job of containing the pandemic spread on this island that's packed with 23 million people. And Taiwan received no praises from WHO. Taiwanese representatives were excluded from crucial meetings from WHO. And Taiwan's achievement was wrapped up under China's. So WHO still label Taiwan as a high-risk area, even though Taiwan so far, despite being so close to mainland China, Taiwan so far has only 77 cases and 1 death. So the whole WHO really lost its credibility throughout this whole pandemic.
Oh yeah, for sure. And they still have not called China out on the cover-up.
No, they still have not. Yeah, because I think they are too far in their praising and joint interests together to do so. That's why I think after this whole pandemic is over, I think many countries will, next time if something similar happens, WHO has lost its credibility, many countries will not. Let's wait for WHO to give guidance.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Washington Post ran an interesting article last week that brings attention to conspiracy theories now swirling around in China that blame the U.S. I'd like you to comment on that a bit. Some statements that I've heard that are being promulgated in China are, the United States should learn from China about how to respond to an epidemic. The United States was the origin of the coronavirus, and the global crisis was never China's fault. Can you speak to that for a bit? I mean, just the level that they go to cover this up is just insane.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I mean, I think one of the fallout of this whole pandemic, once it's over, I do believe it will be over, is we will recognize what does China rising, what does the communist China, I should say, what does communist China's rising or this return to world power status really means to the rest of the world. I don't think we recognized this before the pandemic because many countries were praising China. I just had an article about how Italy and Iran both signed up with China's Belt and Road, infrastructure project. Everybody thought, China's rising is inevitable. It's going to be this new, much more beloved partners on the global stage. And how China handled this, how communist China handled this whole pandemic really showed us their true color. First, they try to cover up, and then they try to handle misinformation. And then when the situation in China probably is getting a little better, but outside of China, the pandemic spread has been getting worse. And the Chinese leaders probably, like playing chess, they're looking several steps ahead. They know that when this pandemic is over, that China will, when people turn their attention from contain the pandemic back to who should be held responsible, right, for all this death, sickness, and the economic downturn, who should be held responsible? They're going to turn to China. So that's why their censorship and the propaganda machines now going overdrive, try to turn back the blame to the United States before anyone. Because we are fighting the pandemic right now, so nobody really have much energy, resource, and time to address that. So they think now is the opportunity for them to try to change the narrative to blame the others. Which is, we shouldn't be surprised about it. For people like me who's a long-time observers of China, none of us are really surprised. That's just their typical playbook. When something bad happens, it's always denial, delay, and then blame someone else. There's nothing new there.
And it's not only the silencing of Chinese citizens, but now U.S. journalists as well.
Yes. And that's really unfortunate turnout, too. That's not only they kicked the 3 Wall Street Journal reporter out, which they blame the racist headline is just such a cover up. It has nothing to do with the headline. I have a piece on the Federalist that kind of explain all the background information. All I can tell you now is it has nothing to do with the headline. The headline was a cover up. For this is something that they wanted to do because the foreign journalists really helped, especially the foreign journalists who brave enough to stay in Wuhan to cover what's really going on the ground, to show it to the rest of the world, and really drives Beijing mad, because again, they want to control the messaging and they want to present China as this all-powerful, benevolent, and have everything under control, making great sacrifice, a world power. And then you have a foreign journalist that say, wait a minute, that's not the case, and here's what's really going on. And so they just use this as excuse to, the latest I read is they're going to force Wall Street Journal, New York Times, as well as the Washington Post, journalists in China to submit will not renew their visa in 2020. Basically, will not let them reporting in China. This is just, disgusting. Mm-hmm. This is a cover up, beyond that what we have imagined. Every time we think we saw the lowest of the low, and they kept the Beijing keep going lower.
Right. Well, do you think people in China are really buying this cover-up?
No. That's why we should go back to talking about the Dr. Li Wenliang. And also this pandemic. I wrote in my articles, in the past, when there was a Hong Kong protest, when there was Uyghurs who millions of them got interned in internment camps, those things, caused a, big revelation outside of China, but didn't really generate as much coverage nor empathy. I shouldn't use empathy, but reactions from majority of the Chinese people, because those events were very isolated. They happened just in one corner of China, and it doesn't really impact, at least on the surface, it doesn't really impact majority of the Chinese's well-being. This pandemic, however, changed everything, because it's a virus has no color and it doesn't differentiate. It goes everywhere, and everybody could be infected at any time. So this is something that's really left an impact on the Chinese people's psyche, because now suddenly, for years, they accepted a social contract from Chinese government to say, hey, you will get a limited freedom. In exchange, we'll promise you with prosperity and stability and safety. And most Chinese people accepted that social contract. And for 3 decades, it has worked out well, almost for everyone, except for small groups. It seems to work out for everyone. But this pandemic and how the government's delay and the cover-up really end up hurting the people has become a wake-up call. Now people suddenly realize this so-called this promised a stability and prosperity and safety is really a beautifully wrapped up lie. It's crumbling in front of a virus, and people now realize that had China had free press and freedom of expression, none of this would have happened, or would not happen in this scale. So after Dr. Li's death, there was overpouring of grief and anger on China's social media, and the Chinese censors really had to go overdrive to try to curtail it. But all the signs we see now, Chinese people are more willing to speak up, because they realize in order to keep themselves safe, to keep their family safe, freedom of speech is essential. Just give you a couple quick examples. Most recently, a Chinese senior leader went to visit a lockdown community in Wuhan. It's a highly staged visit. So all the residents were told they have to stay inside their apartment. They were not allowed to come out, right? So as she was working through the community in this highly staged, event, several residents shouted from their balcony, say, "It's all fake. Everything's fake." and these were all recorded. The reason they say it's all fake is because those residents, they were low on groceries, and their buildings were supposed to get disinfected regularly. It didn't happen, but the government officials staged it, to pretend they were delivering food and disinfected buildings when the senior official came to inspect. So after the people complained, the local government showed up the next day, to deliver food and to disinfect the building. So people realized that they have to be the squeaky wheels. Another sign is after 2 Chinese citizen journalists disappeared after posting videos about what's really going on in Wuhan, the pandemic. Another young Chinese journalist, he was working for China's state television. He had this really rising career. He quit his job. He knew the danger going in, but he traveled all the way to Wuhan to start posting videos, visiting communities, visiting the funeral homes, and now he's disappeared too. But right before he disappeared, he posted this video on YouTube, basically saying that, young people, he's only 25. He said young people like him mostly have no knowledge of what's happened in China's past. They think the history, the situation they have now is what they deserve. And he said, no, don't believe that. He said, he hoped more young people will join him to start speaking the truth. And I just find it so inspiring to watch his last video. I think we're going to see more and more people taking different actions, maybe not the mass protest like they did in Hong Kong, but the Chinese people are waking up, realized how essential it is for their own safety, to have freedom of speech and free press.
Looking at the scope of this crisis all over the world now, China has put hundreds of thousands of lives at risk, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it has affected almost every single one of us. My heart just goes out to the people who have lost loved ones or are struggling with health and living in fear. I just can't imagine what Wuhan must look like right now. And speaking about that village, are there any stories that you can share with us that are encouraging, stories where people out of resilience have risen up and been able to help their neighbors, either, providing food to each other or resources? Do you have any of those stories?
I don't have a specific stories about that, but in one of my articles, I linked a video to show that the Wuhanese, they're shouting through their windows at night, and they waving their cell phones to show the lights and basically cheer each other on, to say, hey, Wuhanese, don't give up, Wuhanese, keep going. I found that those things are very encouraging. And also the doctor, the female doctor, Aifen, she's speaking up, and she interviewed. She told the truth in an interview with the Chinese media. Most recently, her interview was deleted, but Chinese netizens are so creative. Now they're trying to find all kinds of ways to share her interview. They use the Star Wars image. They use the emojis. They even use the imaginative language to to translate her interview into something else so they can share. So all this to me are very encouraging. That again, people are waking up. People are dealing with it. I think for your listeners, if they really want to know how people in Wuhan, in the city is still under lockdown since January 23rd. So if we are going crazy just after 2 days of self-quarantine, imagine what they have to go through. And you don't really have to imagine, because there are other activists working on translating diaries from Wuhanese and post them on internet. So if anybody's interested, they can follow my Twitter, Raleigh Speaks, and I have links to share the hashtag Wuhan Diaries that the people can link to and read. Those it's translated into English just to see how those people live through lockdowns. And to me, those things are precious. And it's people who write those diaries, who take the risks to translate them into English, are taking great personal risks. But these are part of our human history that we need to keep, we need to document. And again, once this pandemic is over, we need to come back, look through all those documentation and decide how we should move forward and hold Beijing accountable for this pandemic.
I couldn't agree more. And I will make sure to link all of those resources that you just named in our show notes. Helen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for getting the message out.
As always, thank you so much for listening today. Our podcast team loves putting this show together for you every week, and it's so encouraging to hear back from our listeners. Feedback is super important to me because it lets me know what you'd like to hear more of, including the kinds of topics you're interested in most, and also how I can improve this show to make sure you're getting the most out of it. You can reach our team at actonline@acton.org, or you can call our office at 616-454-3080. And if you like our show, you know what to do. Leave us those ratings and reviews on the Apple Podcast app and subscribe. Acton Line is on YouTube, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you listen.